Well, good day, everybody, and welcome back. Today, we are going to just have a casual conversation, no real notes, even with my very good friend, Jason Lavigne. So, welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Nadine, for having me, and it's an honor to finally make it to your podcast. You know you made it when you got onto the Nadine show, so thank you very much for having me. I appreciate this.
So, some comic relief right from the get go. I love how this
I
is going to
really like
go.
your stuff. No, I really like your stuff. You're very professional, your guests are relaxed, and you get into good topics. So it is a pleasure and an honor.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Jason has become a very good friend of mine. We do lots of stuff together. And for those of you who are not quite signed up yet for the Red Deer event, Fundamental Truths, on this Saturday coming, please make sure that you check out the website and going to be there and be a part of that. So, Jason, any few quick words that you want to say on that first and foremost?
I'm very excited about all the speakers that we have coming together. I'm looking forward to your moderated question and answer with the entire panel. We've got several lawyers and some advocates to come talk to us about the fundamental truths. Do we need to get back to it? What are they? How much do they value the foundation that we're trying to build? And there's going to be some talk about faith as well, return to faith. So I'm looking forward to Pastor Sean Ham and his prayer, and then all of our speakers. So it should be a good time in Red Deer.
Awesome. So, with that in mind, let's just talk a little bit about 2025 and what the heck is going on here in 2026. Because, man, it started with a bang, literally.
I like the way you put that, no pun intended, right? January 2nd, a bunch of bangs down in Venezuela. But no, 2025, it didn't roll out the way I thought it would. There was some surprises there for sure. And some things that we need to kind of reminisce and look back on because you may have missed it. There's some pretty important things that happened in 2025 that didn't make the headlines, but it should have. So I'm excited to kind of dig into that a little bit more with you.
Yeah, so let's get started. So, what were some of the things that you didn't think got really addressed or made the headlines in 2025 that should have gotten more attention?
Well, I would think for Canadians, what you should pay attention to is what's going on in Europe when it comes to privacy and arresting people for their speech online. Over 12,000 arrests in the United Kingdom, Germany, France, a lot of countries out in Europe have been cracking down on people and having expressions and conversations. It hasn't happened here yet in Canada, but we should be paying attention. And we haven't. We've been really focused on what's going on south of the border with Trump, here with Carney, and we're seeing Carney bring in these bills. But if you want to see what happens once those kind of bills are in place, Europe in 2025, especially the UK.
That's a really good point because Carney is bringing back and is reintroduced, even though it was defeated once, the online hate under a new name. But there's a number of bills, and people like John Carpe, and we've addressed that on this show, have really pointed out the fact that we are totally aligning towards a communist ideology and propaganda, and people of the state will be those who actually disagree with the government's narrative. So, definitely something that doesn't get, I think, talked about enough. And I don't think Canadians actually really take a lot of this seriously, to be honest, because I think there's still a lot of this, it can't happen here.
That's 100% correct, and that's why I wanna ring that bell because absolutely can it happen here. Carney's first move when he became prime minister was to go to Europe. He's aligning us with Europe. He talks as if we're gonna join Europe, and if you wanna know what's gonna happen here within the next year or so, take a look at what's going on in Europe. It's not good. It's not good. Young girls are getting, harassed at, the home by the authorities because they reposted something. They're not even the originators of it, and it's just getting really ugly. In Germany, there was a big crackdown overnight. Something like 100 different locations got visited based on online posts. And these weren't hateful or calls to violence because that's already illegal. This was your thoughts and expressions. So we really should pay close attention because what happens in Europe will be here on our doorstep before you know it. And you're correct. Canadians have this attitude that it's way over there. It's not going to happen here. It wouldn't happen here. It will happen here. So let's not forget that.
Yeah, it's funny. We talk about Russia and Ukraine, and we talk about everything else except for what's happening on our own doorstep sometimes. And I'm going to bring that back up here when we start talking about 2026. So don't let me forget, because I think a lot of what we're seeing here as far as Mark Carney and this alignment with the EU and with China, which is where he's going back to again next week. There's a Cold War that's going
Mhm.
on right now. We are going back to the Cold War days, and except it's not Russia that's the enemy here. And I think Canada is going to have to make a decision as to who they are going to call ally and who they're going to call enemy. And I think Carney is aligning us right now with the EU and China. And I don't think that's a side that we necessarily want to be on. But we'll get to that here in a minute. What are some of the other topics that you think 2025 should have got more attention and did not?
Well, China, but not in the way you were talking about there. Their military is growing. They're really getting ready for something. They've been talking about 2027 is when they're going to take some moves towards Taiwan. And they have really taken some big steps in 2025. Kind of got lost in a shuffle when you had the Middle East, Iran stuff, you got the Ukraine stuff going on, and Trump, just anytime he hits the screen, it distracts people. But China has been staffing up their military, have been building a lot of ships. They got some aircraft carriers, one recently launched. So they're preparing and they're kind of doing it. I wouldn't say under the covers, but we're not paying attention to it up here. It's not a topic up here. And then the another one I want to tack on to there was the foreign interference that disappeared at the beginning of 2025. This was something we were talking about here in our own parliament. There was a lot of concern. I think at one point 44 MPs were known but not named. And that whole issue went away when they prorogued the parliament. So in 2025, we forgot about the foreign interference here, and we should be facing far more attention to what's going on in China when it comes to staffing up their military.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that that foreign interference specifically was directed at China. Interfering. And so it did go away, and there's been no accountability. This is the part I find with government today is there's absolutely zero accountability for the actions that they take. They're spending taxpayer dollars. They're making laws and regulations that literally are not to the benefit of Canadian citizens, but are certainly to the benefit of liberal crony corporate interests. And other countries for sure, China as well as Ukraine and so many others. And and I'm going to push back on the fact that Canadians are just not paying attention. Now I know there's some really good reasons why, but what you focus on truly does expand. And so if we don't start paying attention to these things, don't get ourselves informed as to what's actually going on with our own government, these things are only going to continue to get worse. And my outlook for 2026 is not a rosy one. So, okay, so we've talked about China interference. We've talked about um, what are some of the other ones that you were thinking should have got more attention?
The Canadian Pension Plan, I think that that one slipped under the radar big time. That may be broke or already underwater. Canada may not understand how much of that is already in trouble. It's on the books as an asset for Canada when Canadians actually own it. That shouldn't be the case. And the budget was big headline for about 5 minutes, and then an MP crossed the floor, and then that budget whole conversation went away. So when it comes to Canadian pension plan and security of our future, I think that got under the radar. And then the budget itself, it was big news for a short period of time. And then the crossing of the floor with the Conservative MP swept that one away. Everybody was focused there instead of what we actually are doing. $85 billion, I think it was, deficit spending. It's going to be horrible for the next few years for sure. And it passed. So that one kind of just went away when we should have paid far more closer attention to that. Now,
Yeah, I
some of
think
us did. Like you came on a podcast with me. We were highlighting it. We were talking about it. But when it comes to the mainstream or most Canadians, they kind of forgot about it pretty quickly.
Well, I think it's just when you start getting into budgets and you start talking about, billions of dollars getting thrown around, it's not tangible for people. It's not real. And I think a lot of people feel helpless or hopeless right now as to like what they can do to influence that. I mean, the government's just going to do what the government's going to do, right? But people have got, again, that's where people have got to get a little bit more vocal, because silence is consent for the government. But you brought up three things there because you brought up the CPP. And one of the things that you said, and you don't get too many things wrong very often, but you said that the CPP belongs to the people. It does not. actually. It is a government asset. It always has been a government asset. It is a payroll tax. And that payroll tax gets paid. It is a Ponzi scheme. Your dollar that you contribute as a working Canadian today walks right over to a retired Canadian. And Alberta, which is why I did the tour that I did around Alberta in promoting the Alberta Pension Plan, was to get us out from underneath that window. Forgive me there. Um, because people talk about the assets that it has. Well, that's a very small number of assets. If you actually divided that up to with the 22 million people who are contributing to it, it's $28,000. That's what it works out to. And that's with, in my opinion, now this is opinion because I can't factually prove it, although I do know with certainty that when you're doing private equity evaluations, they are very vague and they always are to the benefit of the company, but you don't know what something's worth until you really sell it. And last year, one of the things that people did not pick up on was the private equity portion that had been so heavily invested in with the Canada Pension Plan. There was significant, and I mean significant losses to that. So, the whole Canada Pension Plan is not what people think it is. It is definitely something worth digging a little deeper into. It's a benefit program. They got you to sign up in 1966 with the social insurance number by dangling this little carrot saying, oh, we'll give you a free pension. Nothing the government ever does is free. And think about it. If you're 65, let's say you die the day before, you turn 65 before you've applied for your CPP. Where does that money go? Doesn't go to you. Doesn't go to your family. Even it goes back to the government. So people need to get very clear on what these programs are. They're not always what they seem to be, and who do they benefit? And the CPP is a benefit directly to the Canadian government. It is certainly not a benefit for citizens. Last topic on that one: if you yourself had paid um, into the same amount, dollar for dollar, that you had paid into CPP and your employer match, like you have done, you would be walking away today with about $1.3 million in retirement. That's $6,000 to $8,000 a year, depending on how long you want to stretch that. Or sorry, $6,000 to $8,000 a month, depending on how long you want to stretch that in years. And the government's very smart. They know all the statistics, right? They know all the actuarial data. So they know what the longevity is for people. And most people are never going to live long enough to actually get what they've put into CPP back. And the max you can get is 1364 today. Most people never achieve that. I think the average is about $870. And then, they talk about what a great program this is. Well, when you could have invested that exact same dollar and be living on $6,000 to $8,000 a month, and the government's giving you 8 to 13, I think we need to reconsider whether or not that's a good deal.
Well, I love how you pull back the label because they slapped a label on it, and when you look at it, it's a Ponzi scheme, and that's what I was kinda highlighting, and yeah, normally, it would be owned by the people, but that's not what we have here. It's an asset for Canada. That part we knew, but I really didn't understand how bad it was and how much you could have had you invested it somewhere else. Instead of, doing the dollar match into the CPP, you could put it somewhere else, and you could be living comfortably compared to what you have now. But
5%.
that's exactly kind of my point is that flew under the radar, and the losses. I don't think many Canadians understand the losses that you were just identifying there, and I think we really have to pay more attention to that because if that collapsed, why don't you explain to us what that would mean? What would that mean to pensioners if the CPP completely collapsed?
Well, this is why, well, it won't collapse if things remain the same that they are in the short term. There's no long term, in my opinion, viability to the Canadian pension plan. It does need to change, which is why you're seeing benefit plans where the cost is going up. Right now, we have two CPPs. And by the way, for my Albertan viewers out there, you know who's paying more now, yet again, right? So the government knows that Alberta has the highest incomes all across Canada. We have the highest incomes of anybody, youngest workforce with the highest incomes. And so we were already over contributing $3 to $5 billion as a province to pay for other retirees. And now they have a second CPP, the enhanced. I love the words they use, the enhanced CPP. The enhanced CPP means that Albertans, because that only applies from the 74,000 with the regular up to the 80 plus $1,000 now for this enhanced. Well, who does that impact again most? Albertans, right? Because we're the ones in that income category that will be impacted, will be paying more yet again. So, again, from an Alberta standpoint, but if Alberta leaves, I think, and this is why the panic, they called a meeting within days. Chrystia Freeland called a meeting literally of all the finance in every province and had them come together to explain, I think, the severity if Alberta were to leave the Canada Pension Plan, because we are the ones that are contributing 3 to 5. That's an equalization payment. Albertans
Mhm.
voted years ago to end equalization payments of $5 billion a year. Yet here we have a Canada Pension Plan that we're paying in an additional equalization payment of $3 to $5 billion. Let's end it. And it's something within our jurisdiction to do. It's something with Danielle Smith and her UCP government should have done the day they made the announcement. It should have just been, this is the report. This is what we're doing. I've signed, and it would be up and running before even the next election came around. And Albertans would be receiving either A, more money in their pension payment checks, and or our hardworking Albertans would be paying a lot less for the same lousy benefit. And in my opinion, once we get control of it, we can then make amendments to it that actually turn it into something that behaves and acts like a pension plan, something that Albertans can actually keep. Hand off to a spouse and to a child. There's called individual pension plans, IPPs. They're set up. Lots of business people do them. There's no reason why us as a province can't do that. Something that benefits directly the citizen, not the state. So it is, and there it was immediate. When that announcement was made, Chrystia Freeland pulled everybody together, and I think just really wanted to shine the light for them, not to the Canadian public, but to the finance ministers, just what the severity of that could potentially be if Alberta left.
And January 2nd, I had Danielle Smith on my show to talk about some of this, and the Alberta Pension Plan came up, and she highlighted how Alberta Next panel recommended that some more study gets done into it. And I asked her exactly what does that mean, and that means that they have to follow through with some more of the lawsuits and get some more of the answers out of Ottawa. And I asked her if the referendum for the pension plan would be this year in spring, summer, like she hinted at last year. And she said no, she's not expecting it to be in 2026 at all. So that one's going to be sitting on the back burner for a little bit. She's waiting on, and this could be her excuse, but she's waiting on Ottawa to provide answers. How much is there? How much is owed to Alberta? How much would the buyout be or the payout be? So she didn't have any good answers, to be frank with you. We were expecting something more definitive a little bit sooner on the pension plan for Alberta, but it looks like we're going to have to wait till probably the election of next year, 2027. She might put that on a referendum question during the election to see where Alberta wants to go with that, but
If
it won't be in 2026.
if Alberta does not force the hand in Ottawa, Ottawa's not going to ever give them a number to that. And so
Right.
this is the thing, is like, just go in and sign the document and say, we're leaving. You've got 3 years, figure it out. And here's the thing for Albertans, we don't need a penny from that CPP to actually start our own program here in Alberta and start an Alberta pension plan. We do not need a dollar from the CPP. It's going to be nice to know that we are getting something. And even, University of Calgary, Trevor Tome said it was, in his estimate, at least $120 billion as a result of just population analysis, which we've contributed far more than that. Even according to CBC, we've paid in more than $60 billion than we've paid into more than we've ever received back. Like, I mean, it's even the CBC reports it. So come on, it's got to be more than that for sure. So, when you look at those types of things, and for Danielle to just say, "Oh, well, we're going to wait for the government," no, if that's never going to happen. That's what you're saying. Is like, if you're waiting for Ottawa to give us permission to do this, that is never going to happen. If you're waiting for them to give us a number, that is never going to happen. You just have to tell them you're doing it and then force them, and then they will give us a number. But for Albertans, we just need to understand that We don't need a penny to start. We would be saving. We would be keeping an extra 3 to $5 billion here at home if we were to leave the CPP tomorrow. So in 3 years from now, when we have everything set up here, there's some upfront costs, obviously, that we need to do to establish an Alberta pension plan. But even then, let's say it takes $1 billion a year to operate, there's still savings in there for compared to what we're doing today under the Canada Pension Plan. And that's where people are talking about, CPP has got, 7, 8 offices now around the world. They went from like minuscule kind of operating expenses to now it's just become luxury and it's absurd. But then again, considering this is one of the things that I think got really swept under the rug a lot in 2025 was government waste and government spending under this Liberal
Mhm.
government, whether it was Stellantis's 15 billion that they turned around and walked over to 13 billion of that to the United States. The minister who signed off on that didn't even bother to read the contract. And then you look at Telesat, there was another one, they didn't want to give the rural sort of communities access to Starlink because Elon Musk was too politicized and, too polarized. So they gave it to Telesat, and which not a single household has received internet. Nothing has happened with it, and there's so many of those stories that's one of the ones for me that just has, and that ties in with a part of the budget, 90 billion dollar deficit. This is the guy, Mark Carney, who promised to balance budgets, that, the previous government was irresponsible, even though he was part of it and doing the economic advising to Justin Trudeau. And yet, here he comes out, but all he had to do was a simple play on words. Instead of calling it an expenditure, he called it an investment. Well,
Mhm.
selling Canadians resources from right out from underneath them with no long-term manufacturing or production capacity. We're not keeping anything here. We're getting a short-term sale of an asset with no long-term. That's not an investment. And an expenditure in and of itself is not an investment. So yeah, that's a good one to reflect on. Any others?
Yeah, and I think the one that comes to mind quickly is vaccine injury and harm that kind of disappeared in 2025. The conversation stopped. Global news kind of highlighted for a bit that the VIS program, vaccine injury support program, was a bit of a problem because it was costing, like you said, government waste. It was costing a lot of money, but not providing a lot of service to Canadians or even financial assistance. But that was the headline. The headline was the administration of that service, not the fact that we need it. And a lot of people are being denied access to that service. So vaccine injury and death kind of went away. We tried hard to bring that topic forward. There seems to be a lot of people who just want to move on. They kind of want to forget about all that happened in 2021 and 2022 when it came to injuries and the deaths that we've had. But in 2025, that whole topic kind of went away, and that was sad to see because there's a lot of people still suffering. They're in need, and some people lost their family members or loved ones. But the conversation didn't go further than administrative issues with the program, and that's kind of where it stopped with the media last year.
Now, one of the interesting things with that now is with the election of Donald Trump, and his appointment of RFK. You are
Mhm.
seeing vaccines come back to the forefront, and a lot of people are beginning to wonder, when you and I grew up, you might have gotten 5 vaccine shots, and now, like, the childhood schedule is 72 in the United States.
Yeah.
And that's you're seeing, and when you look at health, our health is not getting better. We're the sickest, most obese, in the history of the Western Hemisphere. And you look around other places in the world, and they're not seeing the same sort of impacts on lifestyle as we are seeing here in Canada, the United States. So people have to start asking the question, why? Right? Why are we sicker now when we have more money, apparently more technology? Because people need to realize that every time you put something into your body that doesn't belong there, and then you inundate it, we are seeing our own bodies now attack themselves. right?
Yep.
Autoimmune disease is running rampant. And it's like, well, why is it that our body, because it is being overwhelmed, I think, by external things that are either happening to us through food and through air, right? Water, fluoride in our water, chemtrails that are being, flown into the air. And, all of that lands on us. But every time you take a shower, chlorine, has an impact on iodine and your thyroid. And then you combine that with just an injection directly into your bodily system called a vaccine. And I mean, we're just being inundated. I mean, things are just changing too fast, I think, for the human body to even be able to keep up or respond properly. So, but it is nice to see that even though Canada has ignored that, the United States has really kind of started to bring a lot of this back to the forefront. And the discussions at least are being had somewhere.
Yeah, but I want to push back a little bit on that one because as much as we like the fact that they're talking about it, there's a bit of a deflection going on. They brought forward Tylenol as the reason for autism when we know it's really further than that. Vaccines likely plays a big role in that one. And they reintroduced and supported Pfizer with their mRNA technology. There was an $80 billion commitment to keep going on that. Uh, the COVID vaccine is still on the market in the US. There's some states pushing much harder than the Trump administration is on that issue. So I'm a little bit more optimistic with places like Texas and I think Louisiana and some other states that are fighting hard on that. But I don't know if I would agree that actually, you didn't say they went far enough, but I certainly would say that they didn't go far enough on that one. We were expecting a lot more. But with them doubling down on more COVID vaccinations, mRNA technology, Pfizer contracts, and focusing more on Tylenol than they are the vaccine for the cause of autism, we might be on the right track. But I think a lot of us want to see a lot further and faster progress on that one.
Yeah, and I think it is the speed of implementation is not going to be, I think, what you and I would like to see. But the more light that's shed on it, even in a small, like I always say, a little candle in the darkest room, pierces the darkness. And that's the start, right? So one becomes two candles, two becomes four, four become eight. And before you know, like it's about exposure. And I think the only one good thing that happened out of COVID was the absolute exposure of the corruption and the control that was going on that people just were completely unaware of. And at least now, the discussions are being had. There's even studies right now that are being conducted on the impacts of vaccines and the impact of, people are talking about chemtrails. I've been following chemtrails for, oh my goodness, 30 years probably, because the HARP program, I was aware of that when I had my aerospace and defense company and started looking into things. And weather control has been a big thing, in discussions in especially military application for a very long time. And he who controls the weather, right? So, it's even things as far fetched as some of the conspiracies that, people thought were truly just nut jobs having those conversations. Now you're seeing serious, credible people, some of them whistleblowers, more of them just everyday individuals who take the time to do a little bit of research, and the conversations are being had. So at least there's some positive coming out of that.
For sure, and you're seeing more stuff out of Japan as well, some more studies, some more research, there's more data now. You're seeing people in Canada like Dr. David Speaker and Regina Battal bringing forward information, Denis Rancourt as well. This is all good information that's been coming out in 2025. I think there's a lot of people that are looking for more accountability, though. We'd like to see some people charged, some court cases move forward, even some congressional hearings, some things like that for accountability. But maybe that 2026 is where we're going to start seeing some more of that. And like you said, as long as there's a couple candles flickering, we can get some more light going. So maybe 2026 we'll see some more of that. But I can say that in 2025, I was expecting more of that. I thought maybe we'll see Fauci sit in front of Congress to justify or explain his lies that he gave to the Senate and the Congress. We didn't see that yet. But maybe, like you said, we're making progress and steps in that direction. I'd like to definitely see a lot more, and I don't think I'm alone on that sentiment.
Oh, I would love to see accountability, but one thing that I am certain of, you are not going to see anybody in the government be held accountable for any of that. That's just one
Yeah.
thing that I don't foresee it. I know that may sound like, "Oh, wow," but, I never, ever, ever thought that you would see people go to jail. It was really funny, when I ran for the UCP down in Livingston McLeod, that was one of the things that they threw back at me is like, "Nadine, you called for your opposition to go to jail." And I went, "Jason Kenney, Shandro, we're on the same team. I'm not calling for them to go to jail because of my opposition. I'm calling them, to be held accountable for the decisions that they were made by them. And that's not acceptable, right? You cannot
Mhm.
call out a politician and ask them to be held accountable for their decisions and for the impacts and the consequences that the decisions that they make on other people. Not acceptable. And that even Danielle Smith called me out on that. She's like, "Nadine, you can't call for Shandro and Jason Kenney and these guys to go to jail." And I'm like, I call for them to be held accountable for the decisions they made around COVID. I said, you sent a pastor to jail for 21 days, separated him from his family, his small children, for doing his job, for breaching, your regulations that were put into place arbitrarily, and we've since proven are were useless. Were done strictly for control reasons, and yet I was, I got my wrist slapped. And I'm sitting here and going, so that was my day then, when I realized that even with the election of Daniel Smith, not a lot was going to change here, even provincially. So sad but true. So if we're holding out for accountability, what I'm hoping for personally is just to make sure that people become aware so that we don't replicate the same mistakes. And hopefully moving forward, we can start pushing government for more accountability, and our MLAs, our MPs, our senior bureaucrats as well, right? This is why I'm such a big advocate of term limits. We need to have some people in government that have some consistency from one to the next. But the reality is government has become just this career where you just wait out your 20 years, 40 years, however long it is, and you get your pension, and you just follow the law along, don't create any waves, and that's wrong. Like, to me,
Mhm.
people who get involved in government, it's a civic duty. You go, you do your duty, and then you get out, in and out. And Bruce Party and I have had many conversations. Bruce talks about an amateur government, and I've said term limits of, maximum 2 terms. And that has to apply for administration. Your senior bureaucrats, your consultants, all of them. You get to serve your maximum 2 terms or 8 years, however it is, broken up all in one go, don't care. But that's it. And then so now people are not feeding from the trough. And there's no expectation to feed from the trough, right? They got to go out and actually be productive members of and productive citizens of society. All
Well,
right.
and maybe that was a Freudian slip, but by asking for accountability and Premier Smith saying, "Well, you're talking about them going to jail." Maybe there's an admission there that she understands that if there is accountability, that's what it would mean. And there could also be the mutually assured destruction agreement between all parties and all government that we won't go after you in that way, you don't go after us in that way. Because quite frankly, they're probably all guilty in some capacity for some of that, all of them. So maybe there's some mutually assured destruction there. It's like the nuke. It's like a political nuke, the jail term. So they don't want you to go there because that means, quite frankly, they might get nuked as well. Just going to put that out there because it certainly seems like that on the federal level. The two major parties seem to work together. They don't really go after each other when they could. If the foreign interference, I think, was a T-ball for the Conservative Party, go ahead and get your security clearance and let's get some names out there. But wasn't taken. So I think what you're highlighting there is some mutually assured destruction agreement in place where they know what it would mean if they started opening those doors and nuking those positions and getting the public a little bit more accountability and exposure to it, and they just simply don't want it because it will go both ways.
No, absolutely. And even on the foreign interference, there was some conservative names on that list as well as liberal names, So
Yep.
it's not everybody who thinks that, we've got two sides. They're two sides of the same coin, right? So it doesn't really
It's
matter who's in power, whether it's liberal or conservative. It's just a change in name and the degree and maybe the speed at which we get to the exact same destination. So One of the things I find frustrating with Canadians, and actually it was Andrea Wagner, you and I were just talking about that, and I read her
Right.
little post that she's, we, we apologize for all the little stuff, but yet we are big cowards and we hide from the big stuff that we should be apologizing for. And by that, and I'm not talking about reconciliation here. I'm talking about, big blunders,
Mhm.
and big issues, and the hard subjects that should be discussed. We run from those, but yet, you're 5 minutes late for a meeting. It's like, oh, sorry, 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 sorry. Us Canadians are supposedly so polite. Yeah, when it doesn't matter, and on things that don't matter, we certainly are.
And that's kind of like the Epstein list, right? They're wondering, well, if it was so bad, why did the Democrats bring it out? They're both on the list. They're both on the list. And that's probably why neither one of them really wanted to bring it out. And probably why we never will truly understand fully what it all said, because they're both on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the best way to control somebody is when you can get something on them, right? And, that was what I think Epstein was. It was, if we can get you kind of, pictures and documentation and proof, we now own you, right? It's no
Mhm.
different than anything else. We now own you. And so when we own you, we control you. And whether you're a rhino or a Republican or a Democrat, it doesn't matter. Until people are free to behave and act independent, I think, to a certain extent, you're going to see limited amount of change. But with that in mind, um, Tucker Carlson came out recently and he was talking about the next war. And I alluded to the Big Bang, how January 2nd, 2026. Now, this is something else that I think people need to recognize is that January 2nd, 2026 didn't just happen as a result of a meeting or planning on January 1st, 2026.
No.
It's the things we don't see, and it's the things we're not aware of. It's that unseen hand of action and planning that the government does. Because, the 2nd of January was the result, it was the outcome, but all that planning had to happen in 2025. So when you see that going on, wow, you can just imagine we brought up some things that didn't get enough attention. How about the things that didn't even get like any attention? People are not even aware of that's going on behind the scenes that are planned for 2026, 2027, 2028.
No, you've nailed it for sure, and some of that information has started to come out now. Months ago, CIA operatives were parachuted in. They were watching the president of Venezuela very closely. They had some insider information. They knew where he was going to be. They literally admitted they were just waiting basically for the weather to be perfect for what they wanted to try and do. They were ready to go, locked and loaded for quite some time. They had the military and the Navy hanging out the northern shore for quite some time, and they kind of left it at as, well, what are they doing? Are they trying to seize oil tankers? Are they just shooting boats full of drugs heading towards America? Is that all they're doing? No, they had a lot moving on, a lot going on. Uh, Collecting Moderna was their number one priority for quite some time. In fact, it was under the Biden administration, a $25 million bounty on him, and then Trump raised it to 50 million. So this was a target, but I didn't see that one coming, to be frank with you. So this, when I woke up on the third, I missed an entire war. It was 3.5 hours long, and that was it. Like I woke up and like, what? Holy smokes! And they're done, and they're already heading. And by the way, I'm not sure if you know this, but they're holding him in the same facility in Brooklyn that Epstein was held in. So we'll see how this one pans out. But I
Does he
think
know
you're
the
absolutely correct.
Clintons? That's
Does he
all I
know the
need to know.
Clinton?
Does
Did
he
he?
know the Clintons?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a dangerous one. No, when you get a letter from the Clintons for a temporary internship, don't do it.
Don't
It's
do
not gonna
it.
be good for your health. Don't do it. But you bring a good point. Like, this is how governments work, and you're not really surprised. Like, you don't expect them to go on the New York Post telling you, "Hey, tomorrow we're gonna go grab this guy if the weather clears." But what else are they up to? What are they going to do? One of the commanders of that operation has now gone to the Middle East, so there's a little concern that Iran's next. Even Iran is a little bit concerned about it. Politically, they're falling apart. Their people are fighting back, and behind those protests, there's USD facilitating some of that for sure. It happens here. Okay. So, of course, it's happening there to destabilize what's going on there. But you bring up a good point. What happens behind the scenes? What happens under the covers? Rubio, he highlighted that they've been looking at this for quite some time. And Trump himself, of course, he's not going to keep all the cards close to his chest. He was bragging about how perfect the planning was. They were practicing in the US. They made a full model of the facility as well. They were just waiting for him to get back there at the same place that they practiced and waiting for the weather to clear and went in to get him. So, what else is next? Is it going to be Cuba, Colombia, Iran? What's happening with Taiwan? Like, there's a lot going to be happening in 2026.
Yeah, I've told you, we've discussed this before, that 2026 for me is the year of shifts. And I've been saying shifts, SHIFTS, but as I've
Hmm.
told, I was on with the Critical Compass there the other night. I'm like, feel free to drop the F out of that. There's a lot I think that we're going to see here, and I think a lot of that stems. I don't know how well aware you are of the national security strategy, that 33 little page document that Trump put out, but we are returning to Cold War kind of environment. And
Yeah.
all of everything he's been doing about making sure that the United States has capacity at home, can do things at home, is not reliant on any other part of the world. This whole idea of Western security. And this is where I think Canada and Carney has played his cards, and he's made it very clear that we're not aligning with our closest ally, which, in my opinion, is the United States. He is trying to convince Canadians somehow, Mark Carney, that we are more European and that our values are European, which couldn't be further from the truth. The United States, their friend, their family, they're our allies, they're our biggest trading partner, and we right now are being ignored by them. And a large part of that is because we are straying morally, ethically, value wise so far away from freedom, liberty, capitalism, and looking at more. I mean, people talk to me all the time about, Canadian corporations and the business that's going. What we have going on right now in Canada is oligarchy. What we have going on is fascism. The government in Stellantis, that's fascism. That's the pure definition of fascism. The Air Canada, was it Can app or whatever that they had. That's fascism when you're picking and
Arrive
choosing.
here.
Arrive can, there you go, right? You picking and choosing winners and losers. Now we have the government that's getting involved in housing and building houses. You're crowding out private industry, productive members of our society, small business owners. I watched an article or a podcast today on what happened in the United States, in I think San no one of the California little towns was going to have this massive Costco come in, and because of regulation, environmental regulation, and compliance issues, it got destroyed. But worse than that, they saw more than 50 plus little gas stations close down because they could not afford the new regulatory compliance to meet the standard. So what do you think that does to industry and to the cost of and your standard of living? Now, what's that going to do to the cost? Instead of lowering the price, they figured they could lower 50 cents off a gallon. With this Costco coming in, it was like, I think something like 38 pumps. And this new regulation, not only did it halt that, but it saw 50 plus little gas stations close. That's going to drive the price of fuel up through the roof. And this is California, and this is Canada, right? This is the Canadian mentality: is big business bad and capitalism bad, and we need more social programs. And it was Milton Friedman who talked about immigration, because that's been such a topic too this last year, is immigration. Immigration was different years ago because people immigrated to the United States, they immigrated to Canada, they came here with jobs, they were productive members of society from the day they arrived. There was no expectation that they were going to receive anything. Now we have immigrants that come, and the first thing that's done is we have checks that are being written. They become a part of the welfare system. So it's a big difference when you have immigration based upon productivity and employment, and then when you have immigration that's based upon buying a vote and in exchange, we'll put you on a welfare system. So, when people talk to me about, things that they don't see or that they don't understand, it's like, okay, let's get back to the root cause. Because, people look at me and they say, Nadine, why are you so against immigration? I'm not against immigration. But what we're doing today is we're bringing people into the country and then we're flooding our social welfare programs that we can't even afford for the people that are here, let alone bring new people and add to that problem. So what are your some thoughts for 2026? Because obviously, Venezuela is big. There's a lot of stuff going on in Venezuela that's not being talked about or misunderstood. It's not just about oil, and it sure as heck wasn't just a moral, Trump woke up one day and said, "Yeah, we got to get rid of this dictator." I think the world is being divided into economic hemispheres of power. I think we are going back to that Cold War. The Monroe Doctrine is not to be understated
Mhm.
here, or to be misunderstood. Trump, I think, is protecting American interests. And I think that's his objective. And when you read that national security strategy, he's very clear and doesn't hide it. It's right there out in the open for anybody to read.
Well, like Trump said during the press release, it sounds or press conference, it sounds like he upgraded the Monroe Doctrine to the Donroe Doctrine because he's absolutely executing the exact same thing. And he used that word. He goes, some people call it a Donroe Doctrine because he's looking at Greenland. So I think keep an eye on Greenland. There's probably going to be a big move there. I don't think it's going to be a military move. I think it's going to be a straight out check. They're going to cash or write for it because if you wanted to buy it, it's only 57,000 people on that island, and it wouldn't cost that much if you want to give them all $1 million to go ahead and vote their way over to join in the U.S. as well. So keep an eye on Greenland for sure. Keep an eye on South America. And Canada should be paying close attention because what Trump said quite a few times in that press conference was, yes, we want a secure, prosperous Western Hemisphere. And when he was saying that, all I could think about was how Carney supports terrorism here. We still haven't identified Antifa as a terrorist group. The US has. We haven't followed suit on a lot of those things. And even under the trade conversations that are starting to heat up with the US and Canada, the Trump administration is telling us you need to get rid of Bill C-11, C-18. Don't even bother with C-8 and C-9. Like you're going way too far. We don't want a socialist neighbor to the north. So I think Carney should pay close attention to some of the words that were unsaid in that press conference. That Canada, you're becoming a security threat to the U.S. We take security seriously, we take prosperity seriously, and we do not want a socialist neighbor. Some more of the things I think we should watch out for is in Europe. I think NATO is going to start heating up a lot more. There's going to be boots on the ground. They're going to be called peacekeepers or something along those lines, but they're not there for that. They're there to invoke more frustration out of Russia, Belarus, some other places. I think it might start to get a lot hotter than they are right now. And near the end of 2026, I think China is going to start making some more moves, whether they start doing some blockades around Taiwan or stretching out their legs and their strength and showing some more strength around Taiwan. I think that's absolutely going to be happening. They've said it. They're expecting to be in a full on recapturing of Taiwan by 2027. So you might see some more provoking of the U.S. around that. They're going to have to pick a side. How far are they going to go with it? If you're focused on the Western Hemisphere as much as you are, do you really care what happens over there? I think we're going to find out some of those answers soon too. And a little bit more close to home, I think Canada, one of the major issues, other than Alberta independence, which is obviously something that we're focused on a lot here in Alberta, but Canada wide, I think remigration is going to be a topic that starts to get a lot more steam as more intersections are blocked by prayer. More jobs are unavailable for the youth. Housing becomes more and more expensive, and government housing becomes more of a topic. I think that's going to become a problem. And then on the west coast of Canada, I think DRIPA and UNDRIP and the issues with Indigenous people and the land rights, who actually owns what, is going to be a big one. We're already seeing a bit of a small collapse of the mortgage market out in BC. Banks are a little bit scared about mortgaging property there because they don't know what's going to happen to it. The government stepping in with loans to try and hold that off, but that can't last forever.
But here we
And
go.
of course, if
Government
we're trying,
creates a problem and then government comes in as a solution. And it's like, and again, I love how they spend our money, money that they don't even have anymore.
Mhm. Yeah, and then trying to get to that West Coast with our oil, that MOU. I think a lot more people in Alberta and the rest of Canada is going to see that MOU for what it truly is, and this is what we all said it was before it even came out. It was a nothing burger. It's never going to happen. It was meant to appease right before that AGM, and it didn't work. That was a big political mistake. I was at the AGM when it got booed, and Danielle Smith even got booed when she even tried to imply that she would be able to do something with that. But I think more people are going to understand as the independence conversation and education rolls out that we really have no options to go ahead and enter the Asian market with our petroleum products other than going through the US. And we don't need to have Canada for that. We can do that as an independent nation. So those are kind of some of the major ones I think in 2026 that are hit pretty hot. But I will absolutely say this. My prediction is we have no idea what 2026 is going to bring until it brings it, because that's exactly what happened in 2025.
I've got some things that I'm willing to you're starting to see things like economically now. There's some big players that are making some big shifts, like even the price of silver, and the move in Venezuela. This national security strategy that's been published. They're gearing up for something big, and so I
Mhm.
think we're going to see some big geopolitical events. And I think you're seeing that tension that's coming back, like we used to see in the Cold War days. But one of the interesting conversations I think that needs to be had there is everyone's trying to villainize Russia. But yet, if you look at what's going on with NATO, NATO has been pushing further and further east, which they said they would never ever do, into closer and
Correct.
closer to Russia. Again, coming back to the Monroe Doctrine, right? Like, I mean, the United States, if anybody ever did this to them, there would be immediate pushback. There would be missiles flying, right? It's like, no, that's
Mhm.
not going to happen. But, because Russia, rightly so, in my opinion, has demanded, like, hey, just stop. Advancing closer and closer. Right now, with the type of technology we have, and China, interestingly enough, has been boasting not only about their nuclear capability and ballistic missiles, but they've been talking about hydrogen bombs again. And they're the only ones who have a technology now that can deliver, some, rather devastating and timely, like within minutes. And
Right.
so they're pushing back on some of what we're seeing in the US, saying, you want to threaten us, we're going to threaten you. So there's lots of posturing going on. And, when you start seeing, I think people like Tucker Carlson have conversations about the next war. We are in a war. I mean, the war has been waging from an economic standpoint, for the US dollar. BRICS is not to be ignored in this. But here we're pushing Russia, who I think could very much be an ally. We're pushing them towards, if you want to talk about hemispheres and, economics, Russia has significant resources. China has significant population. And one of the things that Tucker Carlson bought out, and we're pushing the two of them together, that's a bad
Mhm.
recipe right there, right?
India's in there too.
And India's in there too, but, India is in a lot imports, right? So they've got population, yes, but China's population, as you pointed out, and their technological advancements and their military might is not to be underestimated. I mean, it's not US,
Correct.
I don't think, capacity. And either one of those nations alone would never take on the United States. I think it'd be stupid to do so. But, well, now what's happening, you have Europe, not even, United States. You have Europe through this whole Ukraine fiasco demonizing Russia. Russia could have went in and wiped Ukraine off the face of the earth. They could have. If they really wanted to, they could have easily have done this. Right? Putin, I think, has shown tremendous, and I'm not a Putin fan. I'm not here waving the banner for, Vladimir Putin, but I'm talking from a geopolitical standpoint. Russia's got tremendous, and we're pushing them into the BRICS, into the China, India, Brazil kind of environment instead of, how do we work with you? Right. And I think a lot of that is just the neocons and, just the warmongers that have been in politics and, government for far too long. Instead of looking at reality, NATO should have been disbanded when the Warsaw Pact was disbanded in the 1990s. There was no more requirement for NATO after that point. And now
Correct.
we're looking at, putting NATO right on Russia's doorstep. How's that for poking a snake?
No, and I think you're bringing up some really good points. And do remember the US military was designed to be able to handle two hot conflicts at one time. So that means you get three or four and they could be stretched really thin. And one of these strategies that people have, like the bad guys will have, is if they want to rob a bank, they will call in a couple other fake issues for the police to go address. So they're kind of stretched thin. And then they go and rob the bank, do their deed, and get out of there before they know it hit them. It wouldn't take a military that matches the US to go ahead and cause a lot of havoc around the world. You just need to be strategic and understand how they work, what they will go chasing, and how to distract them. So with Ukraine, you got the Middle East. Now you got South America with Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba. All of these are all active right now for the US. It wouldn't take much more to thin them out. So they're just so distracted that I don't know. Maybe Taiwan gets captured. South China Sea gets a little bit hot. We'll see. And don't forget, there's Pakistan, India. They're heating up. You've got Thailand and Cambodia. They're heating up. So there's a lot of problems going around. But when it comes to the U.S. and China, China may be smaller and may not have the might that they have or the experience, but they're not fighting 4 or 5 wars around the world right now either. They're focused on really just one, and that will be to take Taiwan.
Yeah, and more than that too is I shared, I think, a couple of days ago about the difference in mentality between the United States and Canadian, like Americans. We wanted everything yesterday. Like we are the instant gratification kind of, we want it all now. We don't want to have to wait. China plays a very different game. They
Mhm.
are the strategist, right, on the chessboard. They are the ones that are planning 3, 4 decades out. They plan generations. They don't just plan for tomorrow. Albertans, Canadians, Americans, we all, spend more time playing, planning a vacation than we do thinking about geopolitical events and what our family may potentially look like. And we've instilled this somehow, these values now and these ideologies that, hey, I don't care about my kids, let them figure it out for themselves. We're the first generation really to start talking that way. Even the Bible speaks about, that the wise man is the one who plans for 3 generations.
Right.
Right? That's how you
Yeah,
preserve your
100%.
wealth. That's how you preserve your culture, your history, your heritage. There's so much wisdom in that. And we've got people now they're saying, to hell with our kids, let them figure it out. It's their problem, not mine. You see that with this whole CPP idea. It's the older generation that are claiming their Canada Pension Plan that they're like, "Don't touch my pension." And it's like, "Well, do you want it? Are you open enough to have the conversation? Let me explain to you what it is. Let me explain to you how, you could be better off. And let me explain to you the harm that is being done to the next generations in keeping things the way that they are." And they're not open. Many of them are not open to that. They don't even want to have the conversation. And that is a
Well
huge shift in how people think that has happened, I think, in the last 20 years.
well, something that's happened a little bit more recently that I'm optimistic about is there's a return to faith. There's a lot more people open with their faith, returning to faith, and focus more on the family unit and the individualism. And I think these are all good signs that possibly we have a chance to make this work. And I'm looking forward to that part of 2026. Charlie Kirk, I think, opened the door. His assassination opened the door to a lot of people to stand a little bit with more courage and bravery when they are talking about their faith and focusing more on their family and not willing to let the society bully them or media bully them or shame them and hide their faith. There's going to be a battle in Christianity. There's one against it right now, but we're gonna have to keep fighting. And I do like our odds. I think things are getting better on that front. Our church is full every single week now. We're talking about expanding it, and I think we're seeing that more and more. So I'm optimistic about that portion of it. It's going to take courageous fighters to stand up to address a lot of these issues that we spoke about here today, and I am optimistic that we still have a fighting chance. So I'm looking forward to that portion of it.
Yeah, well, the Epoch Times actually just did a great little article on courage. And courage is something I've been promoting for a very long time because you know what? We're all going to feel fear, but it's the willingness. And I always tell people, you can't have fear and faith at the same time. You can
Mhm.
really only have one or the other. So, by choosing faith, it means, okay, you believe there is a greater design, there is a purpose. And I've had so many people call me out on, oh my gosh, you're like the modern day Esther. And I'm like, oh Lord, I don't want to be the modern day Esther. But, we all are to a certain extent, because I think we were put here for a time such as this. And people are able to model other people. So if other people are still holding to their principles, right? When I wrote my book, Alberta Rising, it was about principles, not about policy. Because if we can get back to core principles where we can say, I can't violate my principles, then, courage does become easier to do, because you have a roadmap, a path that keeps you anchored to what your convictions are. But more importantly, is as people see other people display courage, they are inspired to do the same. I always tell people courage is contagious. It truly is. So, if you can be strong in your convictions, if you can get some solid principles to anchor you, um, in faith, or in whatever. Like, I mean, I have economic principles, I have lifestyle principles, there's all sorts of principles that we want to find, but we need to anchor them, and we need to be able to say, you know what, I don't violate my principles no matter what happens. And one of the things I'm beginning to encourage a lot of people to do is dig deeper into the why. How did we get here? One of the things, very simple. In 1966, the government implemented a social insurance number. It was voluntary. You didn't need it. Now somehow you have to have one to work. Why? What changed from then to now? Right? And as a result of that, are we more free? Are we less free? Are we more taxed? Are we less taxed? Do we have, more liberties? Or, so these are all the things that we have to start truly honestly addressing. Going back to when this happened, it led down this path. Was that the right path, a good path? Was that the best path for us as citizens? Because we have to avoid making the same mistakes, one, but then we have to start reversing, the control mechanisms that have been put into place to keep us under the thumb of the government and the state, that reignites people's desire for freedom. And because that's where the innovation, that's where the technology, that's where the prosperity comes from, is in free individuals that are able to live their highest and best purpose, and pursue, what's best for them and their family and their communities. So, if there's a message for me for anybody for 2026, is like, yeah, faith, not fear, courage is definitely going to be needed. Principles, because I think it's going to be a pretty rough year coming, and I think it's going to be really important for people to kind of come together and understand that all of this is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not placing judgment good or bad. Reality is it is just what it is. But, we are going to want some people around us to support us through it, I think, and to help us see what's happening. Because I think in understanding the repositioning from a global to more of a national, regionalized kind of environment, which is, I think, what we're doing and what we're seeing now with, the US, and all the talk around Greenland, and Western Hemisphere, and nailing that down. You got to know who your friends are.
Mhm. And I think you've nailed it, and that's why January 10th in Red Deer is about fundamental truths. When you peel that back, whether it's a belief that you have or it's a foundation you build on, it's the anchor that we all need. So I'm really appreciative that you're going to be joining us on Saturday. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that conversation, because this is meant to be a springboard for 2026. How can we move forward and deal with some of these bigger, heavy issues that we're talking about? And one of the ways to get there is a return to the truth. And it's a fundamental truth, because if we can't agree on two sexes, and we can't agree on fiscal responsibility, and if we can't agree on government overreach needs to be stopped, then I think we're going to just go in circles for quite some time. So thank you very much for your assistance on that. Thanks for having me on today so that we can talk about 2025, remind people of some of the issues that weren't discussed as much as it should have been, and what to look out for in 2026. It's a great time to be alive, Nadine, and I'm glad I got a friend like you on this journey as well.
Awesome. Well, there you have it, everybody. That is Jason Lavigne, good friend of mine. And hopefully today was thought provoking and gave you some content to kind of go back and reconsider. And, this is what I think is so important for 2026. Truly is about friendship, it's about community, and it is about getting to the truth. I think you're going to see a lot of headlines and a lot of propaganda. I think you're going to see people trying to hide reality to a certain extent. And I think each and every one of us have a responsibility to dig a little deeper into the issues and don't be silent. Because I'll tell you, we have a system that is built around consent, and your silence is considered consent. So no more consenting. It's time to get loud. It's time to be proud of our heritage, our history, and it's time to stand up when the need warrants it. All right. God bless you all.